Our next speaker is Mike Bodenchuk. And a special thank you to Mike for coming clear back to Utah from San Antonio, Texas. I think he comes from furthest away from any speaker. Mike is currently the state director for the Texas Wildlife Services program. He also served as the state director for Wildlife Services in Utah from 1996 to 2006, and as district supervisor in Richfield, Utah from 1993 to 1996. He attended New Mexico State University and graduated in 1979 with a degree in wildlife sciences. His professional interests include predation and feral hog impacts and management. Mike?
Thank you. When I accepted the invitation to come and speak, I guess I didn't look at the agenda because a lot of the vegetation impacts that I originally had in my paper have already been discussed here. Last night I went back and I changed some slides, and I'm going to spend more time talking about how predation impacts prey rather than how prey impacts affect vegetation, because some of that's been excellently covered already. First, the disclaimer. Predation is a naturally occurring event that shapes both the predator and the prey. It cannot and should not be eliminated. However, in some cases, predation will impact prey populations below human objectives. And I want to maybe belabor that point just a little bit. The paper before lunch on values is very important because values weigh into predation issues. Pronghorn are pronghorn because of predation. They have eyes that are high on their head and bones that are built for fast running because of predation, but it's not necessarily coyote predation that makes them pronghorns. There was a North American cheetah around that actually helped pronghorn evolve into the species that they are now. So these are long-term events, but our objectives for pronghorn management or our objectives for restoring the West are human value objectives, and those are the ones that we need to consider when we talk about predation impacts. If you're as old as I am, you were taught that predators don't impact prey when you went to college. Fortunately, most of you are not as old as I am. But we were shown this graph, and we said that we were told that prey numbers come up. I can't even see that. Prey numbers come up to this dotted line, which is vegetative carrying capacity. Sometimes, as we learn, they overshoot the line. They drop back down, and they cycle. And predators lag behind that by about a year, but they drop back down as well. When I went to college, I was taught that Canada lynx and snowshoe hares are a classic example of this. And as we heard today, perhaps that's the case in northern climates, but maybe not so in southern. Mink and muskrat were another example of this. Most of the time that you see this kind of a system in play, it's a single predator, single prey system. And that increasingly is rare. Many of our predators can bridge over to other prey. In the southern climates, we have multiple predators, for example, that may work on snowshoe hares. And so the Canada lynx, while it may try to cycle, the snowshoe hare cannot because of the other predators. What we've learned since then, and these, by the way, are adapted from Warren Ballard's paper on mule deer predation, is that there can be multiple states of predation. At the low level, density-dependent predation can limit prey. And if they are released from that, then it goes up to where predation is not an issue and vegetation can limit the prey. Now, the important part in both of these graphs is vegetative carrying capacity. Vegetative carrying capacity is generally defined as productivity, but in some cases, and I'll discuss those in a second, that can also be access to the resource. So instead of focusing on whether or not predation can limit prey, it can. What we should question is how do predators limit prey and subsequently affect vegetation components? The first and the most widely studied in our profession is what I'm terming primary predation impacts. And that is how many prey animals are killed by predators. And we do these studies all the time. We turn around and we put radio collars on the stuff and we follow them until they die. And if predators kill them, we said predation is impacting the population. And if they starve to death, we say, see, it's habitat, it's not predators, and we're all happy about this. The second what we've learned since the Yellowstone experiment, I guess we knew it all along, so it's in the biodiversity literature going way back. But secondary predation impacts are based on changes in behavior by the prey to avoid predation. And we knew that they did this too, but we didn't really have an idea of how much of an impact this had. We've done both kinds of studies in Yellowstone as the wolves came back. And what we found out from the predation studies, the first ones, is that the wolves are not eating the elk to death. Certainly they are eating some. The wolves are a coursing predator, and every time a herd of elk gets out in a meadow, they chase them. They eat the last one, and the first 99 escape and say, well, we're not going back there anymore. They change their behavior, and they stand on the steep slopes, and they stand up there in the lodgepole pines to try and avoid predation, and therefore do not have access to the resources they need. These behavior changes reduce their fitness, and reduced fitness reduces subsequent reproductive success. They are trading off, if you will, their individual survival for future survival. What we're seeing now is that moose, for example, in Yellowstone have changed what they eat. They've gone up to the steeper slopes where they're not chased as often, and they've changed what they eat, and their reproductive success is lower, their individual survival rates are lower. The same with elk in those systems. When we looked at the literature, and this is some of the new stuff that I stuck in last night, when we looked at the literature in the past, we've identified 3 different groups of factors that affect predation rates. Predation rates, I've lumped them into habitat factors, predator population factors, and prey population factors. And this is a little bit different than what you've heard from some of the other people. Most places when we do these experiments, we say, we did predator control, look how many dead predators we killed. Or we didn't do predator control, and look how many dead prey animals we had. There are a ton of factors that affect, well, not a ton, 13 I think it is, that affect predation rates, and I want to talk about these in general and maybe focus on a couple in particular. First, linear habitat is the first of the habitat factors. Beaches are linear habitat, and I've had to deal with feral hogs discovering sea turtle nests on beaches. One predator walking the beach can find all of the prey. And in linear habitat, 90% removal of predators may be the same thing as 0 removal of predators, because the 10% that's left can still get all of the prey. There are linear habitats in the West, where riparian corridors are linear habitat. Some of the wet meadows that sage-grouse use to raise chicks in, because there's more bugs in those wet meadows, are actually linear habitat, and they can be worked out very easily by just a couple of predators. Access to water in dry areas, we put in water developments. We know this for desert bighorn sheep in Arizona and New Mexico. We put in water developments. Sometimes those mountain ranges did not support mountain lions before. As soon as we put the water in, then there's permanent water for the lions, and they ambush their prey at the water sources. And so access to water can increase, or limited access to water, can increase predation rates. Fire, obviously, whatever survives the fire is pushed to the outside edge, and you'll have temporary concentrations. Fires are not always burned out in a block. In Nevada, when they had their big fires years ago, there were 10, 20, 50-acre blocks of sagebrush left out in the middle of the fire. Where did all the sagebrush go? In those 10-acre blocks. How easy is it for coyotes or other raptors to work out those 10-acre blocks as opposed to a big mosaic of habitat? And so fire can affect predation rates. Excessive cover. In New Mexico, pronghorns move out as brush grows up because they cannot detect predators. And so excessive cover can make it easier for predators to sneak up on prey. Drought, this one is probably the most recurring theme in mule deer discussions that I've heard. The greatest single correlation between fawn survival in the environment is drought, how much rainfall comes. Unless you ascribe to the fact that they got too thirsty and they died of thirst, just because there's a correlation does not mean there's a cause and effect. For example, predation issues associated with drought are numerous. Fawns that are born during a drought are born lighter than their counterparts that are born during a wet season. They're vulnerable to predation longer. During a drought, deer have to forage longer to get the same amount of groceries, and so they're vulnerable to detection by predators longer. They have to range farther. They may be concentrated on water. Probably the biggest single issue is during a drought, alternate prey for predators is extremely limited. Rats and mice are not there for coyotes to eat. The coyote population may be doing very well because they can switch prey, but they're not available for the coyotes to eat, and the coyotes are going to find something, so they go hunting for deer. Perches, we've created artificial perches that actually separate habitat for ground nesting birds, raptors and corvids, and escape cover, the access to escape cover, are all habitat factors that affect predation rates. Predator factors, the number of predators is probably the one thing we focus on in research, and I'm not going to say it's the least important, but it's probably down there on the list. There's more about the predators that we need to know than just the number of them, or as we do in research, the number of dead ones that we kill. The social structure of predators is very important. Territorial predators have a different social structure than non-territorial. Lions, for example, are very territorial, both males and females in most habitats, whereas raccoons are not. And so that social structure that's out there. The age structure of coyotes, I believe, affects predation rates on other wildlife. A 5-year-old pair that's raised 4 litters on that territory is very, very efficient at hunting out prey. Whereas if they're removed and replaced with a 2-year-old pair, there's still going to be the same number of coyotes, the same biomass of predators out there, but they're not going to be near as effective. Invasive predators are numerous, and they're legendary. Their prey has not evolved with strategies to deal with that. Again, it's not a vegetation issue. It's not necessarily a west, unless you push the west east to Texas. But hognose snakes evolved the habit of puffing up and then rolling over and playing dead to avoid predation. Now that we have invasive feral hogs out there, that's not really a good strategy. It just means that you get eaten while you're still alive. Again, territoriality, you can only put so many coyotes out there on the landscape. You can only crowd them so much, and it is prey-based related, the size of the territory, but there are territories that are going to be occupied, and there's only so many out there. You can put as many raccoons in the room as there is groceries for raccoons and skunks, and so some of those species can really become super abundant. On Bear River Refuge, we have really, really high numbers of raccoons and skunks because there's a lot of food for them. The ability to bridge to alternative prey is very important. The more adaptive the predator is, the better off it is. That's why ferrets and lynx aren't doing real well, and that's why coyotes really are. In studies in Arizona, mountain lions bridged over to cattle. Every lion on the study area ate cattle and helped prevent that downturn in lion populations when the deer herd crashed, because the lion numbers stayed high, and they were able to prevent deer from coming back. You can't rule out individual behavior. There are some mountain lions that are just really, really good at hunting elk or bighorn sheep, and there are some that are going to eat on rabbits and deer, and individual behavior can affect predation rates. In the Stansbury Mountains, there was one mountain lion. As soon as they put bighorns in there, one mountain lion found the bighorns, and every time he wanted a meal, he went back and got them until we removed him. To my knowledge, there's a female on that mountain range at the same time, and to my knowledge, she has not killed a bighorn yet. It's been at least 4 years. So that individual behavior does affect whether or not there's a predation impact. Finally, the one I want to spend a little bit more time on is multiple predator species. And I did postgraduate work on mountain lions in New Mexico back in the 70s and 80s. I've done lion work my whole life, and I really had to wrap my head around this one, but play along with me if you will. Mountain lions eat bucks, mule deer, in greater proportion than their percentage in the population. There's a number of reasons for that. Bucks get out by themselves, group size, all those kind of things. They eat does and fawns in relative abundance to each other. And so if you've got a population with 100 fawns per 100 does, then the non-buck part of a mountain lion's kill will be 50% fawns and 50% does. If you've got a lot of fawns on the ground, mountain lions are going to be eating a lot of fawns. And they're not likely to impact the breeding herd of deer, not likely to affect deer populations as great. If you have another predator, or if you have grouse that affects the fawn abundance out there, and you drop below 50 fawns per 100 does, then the mountain lions are going to be eating more does, more of your breeding age population. Numerically, you haven't changed the number of mountain lions, you haven't changed the number of deer killed, but you've changed the age class and the breeding status of the deer that are being killed, and you've changed the impact to the population. It isn't the lions that did it, it was the other predators that were eating up those neonatal fawns. But this is a really underrated component of what's going on out there. In many of our systems, we've got multiple predators working on prey at different life stages, and it does have a big problem. In prey, the relationship to K is important. If you're above K, predation does not have a problem. It does not present a problem. I guess the question I've got is, what is K? Because nobody can really put their finger on it. It's all the only thing I think we can guarantee is it's not a straight line across the top of the graph. If carrying capacity is productivity, then if you're above that productivity, your herd's going to crash. It's guaranteed. If you're below that area, but they don't have access to K, arguably you could say the carrying capacity has been reduced by interspecies competition or predation rather than by K itself. And this was a hard one, because if you accept that, then carrying capacity really doesn't have much meaning. We're always at carrying capacity if you accept that argument. Breeding synchrony is one of the things that's been used to, one of the developmental strategies that prey uses to flood the number of fawns or calves on the ground. You see it in Africa with wildebeest and everything that eats a wildebeest. You see it with caribou herds. If you've got enough males to breed your does on the first cycle, then your breeding synchrony is compressed, your rut is compressed, your fawn drop is compressed. The same number of coyotes can't possibly eat them all. When you drop to low buck-doe ratios or bull-cow ratios and you have an extended breeding period, then the same number of predators can actually eat more of them, of the neonatal fawns or calves in a short period of time. Group size and composition is important. When wolves first went into Yellowstone, the average age of elk that were being shot at Garner, of cow elk that were being shot at Garner, was like 6.7 or something like that. The average age of wolf kills was over 14. Why? They're the ones at the back. When they ate their way through the 14-year-olds, they got to the 12-year-olds and the 11-year-olds, you know. But those older age animals that are on those habitats are able to detect predators better. They're able to find those places to go, and so species that exist in large herds are less vulnerable than species that exist in individuals. And again, I mentioned alternate prey. Alternate prey is very, very important, especially for those species that are bridging. If you've got enough rats and mice out there, I don't think you can have a problem with coyotes. One of the hardest things for me to get my head around before I moved to Texas was why we had really good deer densities in South Texas and why we had the highest coyote densities in South Texas in the literature. 6 coyotes per square mile in South Texas. Home range is 1.5 miles across. I couldn't figure out why you could have that many coyotes and still have deer. The answer is the habitat. The habitat is so thick there, you can throw a softball into it and it might not hit the ground. Coyotes in South Texas are smaller than coyotes in Utah. Coyotes in South Texas don't chase their prey. So all the deer has to do is leave a sendero, leave a roadway, and they're no longer a coursing predator. So coyotes in South Texas are basically great big red fox. They're a pounce predator that are eating rats and mice. This is a very, very fertile system with a lot of rats and mice in there, a lot of alternative prey. And so we don't see the conflicts with coyotes and deer that you see in other places. Insufficient predation creates as many problems as too much predation. Insufficient predation can result in prey species becoming overabundant, vegetation is overutilized, declines in productivity, and plant species diversity. Excessive predation can result in prey populations declines, and that results in underutilizations, which oddly enough results in declines in productivity and shifts in plant community. We've heard about the Kaibab Plateau mule deer herd a couple of times. I want to give you some numbers just to remember. Between 1907 and 1917, there were over 600 mountain lions that were killed on the Kaibab Plateau. another 74 in the next 10 years after that. Between 1907 and 1927, there were over 3,000 coyotes removed from the Kaibab. All of the wolves were removed in that time. There were 11 killed in the first 10 years, and then there were some stragglers. The Kaibab Plateau is where we learned about carrying capacity and we learned about crashes in population, but it was incredible predation management that went on with zero hunting. That was a closed population at the time. They did not allow hunting. That allowed that herd to explode and destroy their habitat. The cascading ecological effects in the Lamar Valley we've heard about, but that's come at the expense of the elk. Sage grouse habitat in Strawberry Valley, when we got started there were sage grouse were only using 4 square miles of the valley. And we thought that was the best habitat. As it turns out, when we did predator control around there, sage grouse ended up using the whole valley because predation risk was keeping them on that 4 square mile. We'll talk really briefly about invasive and subsidized predators. Red fox in most of the West, actually red fox in most of the U.S. I have a 1942 copy of Game Survey, I think it's 42, it was in the 40s from Aldo Leopold, and he talks about red fox replacing the gray fox in Wisconsin. By now everybody thinks that red fox are native to Wisconsin, but they are an invasive predator. Raccoons in the Great Basin, never had them. Ravens just about everywhere in the West are subsidized. We've got a lot of nesting habitat, a lot of food for ravens and anthropogenic foods in dumps, and ravens are really pounding some of our ground nesting birds. Little quick commercial. This doesn't have anything to do with the vegetation components, but there's other conflicts. Predation by invasive fish on native fish is just as important an ecosystem problem as predation in terrestrial systems. Herbivory by invasive carp on Utah Lake, they're wiping out the hiding habitat for the native fish, and then other fish are able to eat them. Feral swine. You want to talk about feral hogs? Talk to me later on. They're an ecological train wreck. Some states like them. California manages them as a game species. Just say no to feral hogs, I promise you. And then there's invasive diseases that come along. As much as we try and recover prairie dogs, plague is here. Plague is an invasive disease. They don't have much resistance to it yet. And these conflicts are going to be something that needs to be managed. Predation management to restore, to support the restoration of large predators for wolves and grizzly bears is still a related conflict. Where wolves have come in, I think in the northern Rockies, we literally shot them into recovery. Whenever they were in trouble with livestock, we were able to remove them. Contrast that with Mexican wolf for a number of reasons. That strategy is not available down there in the Southwest, and quite frankly, if somebody's not managing that efficiently, there's going to be some problems, and poaching and shooting those wolves is one of them. My final thought is that restoration of the West will require clear vision. I'm not sure everybody understands what restoration is going to look like. We're going to have to decide what the desired environment looks like, and active management is going to be part of it. Managing one species to benefit another is going to be socially controversial, but it can be done. We can have some science behind it, and it's got to be done in an adaptive management approach rather than a single prescription, because every system is going to be different. That's all I've got. If you got questions.
I have questions.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, in Nevada, you're exactly right. We're seeing a huge increase in distribution of red fox. What is the interaction of coyotes and red fox? In other words, if we're doing extensive coyote control, do they control red fox, or what is that related?
Al Sargent in the Dakotas, in North Dakota in particular, showed that they were exclusive. One would exclude the other from certain habitats. The idea was that coyotes weren't as bad on ducks as red fox were, so don't do coyote control and then you won't get red fox. I'm not sure that with the vision that 30 years since that research was done, we're exactly sure on that. The idea of a mesopredator release really is that they both need the same resource. Some places are better coyote habitat, some places are better fox habitat. When CRP went into the eastern side of South Dakota, red fox still stayed in the cropland, but coyotes then went into the CRP. And so if there's two kinds of habitat available, they will separate each other. Red fox in Strawberry Valley used the valley floor, while coyotes were on the slopes. If you put them in the same room, coyotes will kill red fox. But if there's room for them to be on the landscape and separate it themselves, they will separate it themselves, and both do very well. Thank you.